Why did Shakespeare have to write under a pseudonym? This important question actually gets to the heart of everything history has misunderstood about the Elizabethan period. Referred to as the English Renaissance and England's Golden Age, this era is synonymous in our minds with the works of William Shakespeare. We recall a happy time in merry England, where common people flocked to the commercial theater to be entertained and delighted by the plays of Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, and Christopher Marlowe. But is there a deeper story here? Despite how it's been preserved in the popular imagination, Elizabethan England was in fact one of the most repressive police states ever. It was illegal to write satire or history. It was treasonous to even discuss who might become king after the death of Queen Elizabeth, who had named no heir. Writers who flouted these restrictions were regularly arrested, tortured, and even killed. So what was it that really drew so many common people to the playhouses? More than carefree diversions, audience members sought commentary and gossip on the political affairs of the day, which had to be cleverly disguised beneath layers of allegory lest their writers or even actors be hauled away by the Queen's men. Edward De Vere had spent many years serving as Queen Elizabeth's courtly poet and propagandist, a service for which he was paid an £1,000 annuity from the revels and entertainment budget. Just as Hamlet presents a play to influence the king's conscience, De Vere sought to influence Elizabeth's opinions on which courtiers to favor and which suitors to reject. However, as Queen Elizabeth grew increasingly senile and the issue of her royal succession remained unresolved, De Vere was forced to present his case to the public. 1601 marked the Essex Rebellion, a desperate attempt by De Vere's coalition of nobles to limit the control of Elizabeth's advisor Robert Cecil, who was scheming to place James of Scotland as the next English monarch against their wishes. The rebellion was kicked off by a special presentation of Shakespeare's Richard II at the Globe Theatre, for which actors had to be bribed due to the scandalous nature of the play. Richard II depicts a monarch being deposed, and this was the ultimate taboo in Tudor England. The fact that Richard II represented Queen Elizabeth was lost on no one, especially not Queen Elizabeth, who said as much to her royal archivist William Lombard, saying, "I am Richard, know ye not that?" Sure enough, this production started a riot in which hundreds of armed men confronted Elizabeth's government. The uprising failed, and its leaders were imprisoned by the cunning hunchback Robert Cecil, who was incidentally the inspiration for one of Shakespeare's most iconic villains, the cunning and hunchbacked Richard III. When we understand that in their time, William Shakespeare's plays were controversial to the point of being treasonous, it's easy to understand why their author would choose to hide his identity, for the purpose of protecting both himself and his loved ones. Robert Cecil was ultimately successful in installing James of Scotland as England's king, an appointment which Edward De Vere fought against until literally days before James got the throne. De Vere died about a year into James's reign of uncertain causes, and it's no surprise that after De Vere's death, it was a priority for the new regime to discredit its formerly outspoken opponent. Dekker and Webster's 1604 play Westward Ho was a hatchet job on the recently deceased Earl's reputation, likely funded by Robert Cecil. Within months, Ben Jonson, George Chapman, and John Marston teamed up for a rebuttal play called Eastward Ho, which portrayed De Vere positively, until it was shut down by the authorities. Imagine today if Quentin Tarantino, Martin Scorsese, and the Coen brothers had suddenly collaborated on a film about politics, and were subsequently arrested and threatened with having their nose and ears cut off. It's sort of an equivalent situation. These government actions intimidated other writers from speaking out in support of De Vere, and it wasn't until after Robert Cecil's death years later that the first eulogies for the legendary Earl were even published. Given this historical context, one comes to realize that the commonly held perception of Elizabethan England is a rather flat caricature, and so too is the figure of its most iconic playwright. What we've been handed down through the generations is in fact little more than propaganda, an intentionally constructed cover story to deflect from a messy, vital truth. I hope this helps to explain why it was essential for Shakespeare's plays to be written under a pseudonym. For more on Edward De Vere, check out the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website, and special thanks to Catherine Kilgene for her research.